Claire hadn't planned on time-travelling that Sunday afternoon. She was rummaging through the dusty attic of her childhood home, an event her husband likened to facing a booby-trapped attic inhabited by ancient spiders, when she stumbled upon an unassuming leather-bound journal. It looked wildly out of place amidst boxes of old yearbooks and forgotten birthday presents. The spine was cracked, and the cover inscribed with looping handwriting, "Aunt Harriet's Journal." Claire carefully dusted it off. "Aunt Harriet? Did we have an aunt I never knew about?" she muttered. Her grandmother had once mentioned a far-off relative who vanished from family photos and stories. Details were always sketchy, but so was Grandma. Her mother swiftly changed the subject whenever Claire asked. Now, however, this relic was in her hands. Kneeling amid a pile of quilts, Claire opened the journal. The attic's afternoon light dust motes waltzed in the air like they were listening. It felt like finding a secret time capsule in the rafters. Claire's fingers trembled with excitement and disbelief. "Well, Aunt Harriet," she said softly, "you certainly earned yourself a place in our family stories." She smiled at the archaic elegance of the script. Taking a deep breath, she began to read the faded ink. Thursday, June the 10th, 1872, Harrington Township, Pennsylvania. Today I wrote a letter that might just change my life. I mean that quite literally. I clipped an advertisement from the Harrisburg Herald that read, "Wanted, a cheerful young lady, handy with a hoe and able to cook a mean pot of stew, to be the wife of a prosperous Kansas farmer. Farm work, a log cabin and free passage west provided." I might have added the cheerful part myself. Some of those ads get a tad blunt. In pencil I answered, "Dear Sir, I am a hard-working woman of 24 summers, with experience in barn chores and an unusual affinity for pie baking. I have never used a hoe to threaten a man, but give me time. I would be interested to learn more about your offer, and I even own a respectable iron skillet that will come with me. Miss Harriet Caldwell." I sealed the letter with 3 drops of green sealing wax green being my favourite colour and mailed it off to Lawrence, Kansas. I also threw in a wry joke about soap starching his shirts, figuring a touch of humour never hurt anyone's prospects. Everyone back home thinks I've lost what's left of my wits, though I try not to let on. Old Mrs. Granger swears off men entirely after hearing about that ad, and Cousin Millie muttered something about me trading one set of chores for another. Mother just shook her head and fanned out quilts on the porch. But I was raised on sermons about daring adventures beyond the hearth. Many of us girls dream of an exciting life under the vast sky, instead of just patching socks by the fire. After Papa fell in the war and our farm struggled, I'd sooner spare myself at least one more shovelful of back-breaking drudgery. Monday, July 1st, 1872, Huckleberry Post Office, Pennsylvania. The days have dragged like my old mule at the county fair. Molly, the cow, Mother's nickname for her, insisted on coming with me to town. You should have seen Molly's face when I tried to bribe her with sugar cubes. The postmaster, Mr. Kinsey, gave a knowing wink when I handed him 2 sealed letters, one to Kansas, one to Colorado. "Good luck, Miss Caldwell," he chuckled. "If you can handle those western prairies, you'll do fine." At least Molly doesn't question my sanity yet. My cheeks are still hot with excitement as we head home through the warming cornfields. Sunday, July 14th, 1872, Harrington Township, Pennsylvania. The mail arrived at dawn with a thin envelope waiting in our cabin. Inside was a letter in tidy, flourished script from a William Anderson of Lawrence, Kansas. He paints a picture of sunflowers and harvests and promises that no one at home will starve. Also, in what was surely meant to be charming but struck me as cheeky, he said, "A woman who can cook and laugh is the best foundation of a home." The audacity of that man. He clearly has no idea what he's getting into. I wrote back right away, accepting his invitation to meet in Chicago. And no, I didn't mention that my best dance is stepping on toes. With the letter sealed, I teased it shut with wax in the shape of a cow's hoof. There was nothing more to do but wait for August. The whole countryside feels like it's holding its breath, as if even the hens and hogs know something big is about to happen. So here's to hope, and maybe to Kansas. Monday, August the 5th, 1872, en route to Chicago, Illinois. My boots and I have become far too acquainted with the soles of this train car. We're chugging westward at a pace neither thrilling nor entirely safe. Yesterday in Harrisburg I ate cold chicken pie that Mother packed,
and as the train swayed, I grew more anxious with each passing mile. The countryside here is wide and open, endless fields of golden wheat under skies so big, I suspect the moon is showing off just for me. The car next to mine is lively, a young violinist fiddling into the open window right through Haydn's symphony, I think, and an older missionary type preaching beyond the din. At first, I tried not to annoy the whole car, even offering to tie the bonnet strings of the stern lady across the aisle, who glared at our impromptu concerto. She hissed at me to kindly lower that little hymn, as if I had pressed some rude button for background music. By the time the sun set, I had already decided polite conversation is a wonder second only to coffee in the morning, and coffee is something I plan to bond over with William at first opportunity. Thursday, August 8th, 1872, Chicago, Illinois. Chicago turned out to be a 4-day adventure all its own. I walked for blocks before I found a simple lunch stall, an overpriced sausage on a stick and some potatoes, and scrimped the last penny on hot mustard. As I ate, a street musician played My Darling Clementine on a worn violin, and I couldn't help but toe tap along. Later, to get my nerves in line, I treated myself to a riverboat ride on the Chicago River. Up on the deck, as the city's brick chimneys puffed smoke like dragons around us, I raised a lemonade in a quiet toast to William. May he be worth the ticket price of getting here. By Friday night, I finally spotted a lone figure at Union Station fiddling with our baggage straps. He looked as serious-eyed as in his letter, though his dusty vest and tall boots gave him an entirely different gravity in person. He tipped his hat and said in his slow frontier drawl, "Miss Caldwell." "That'd be me," I replied, trying not to smile too quickly. Already I could tell this man was more practical than poetic. I might have thrown in another joke about whether Mrs. still applied, but it turns out I'm about to be no one's Miss or Mrs., just plain Harriet.
From Chicago, we boarded the Great West Express toward Lawrence. It was longer than anything I'd seen, with more cars than I could count. The engineer blew a whistle loud enough to shake me awake, and we rose and fell over bridges and through endless prairie fields. The folks on board were a wild bunch, a cowboy dreaming of a steak dinner, a mother soothing a newborn, and a retired soldier who measured the distance in stories of skirmishes he'd never seen. I struck up a game of cards by the lantern light. I pretended ignorance of poker's rules, and the cowboy was more than happy to teach me by taking my bets until I finally won a small heap of nickels. Sunday, August 11th, 1872, approaching Lawrence, Kansas. The train ride ended at dawn outside a settlement not much more than a cluster of dusty wooden buildings with one white church steeple. As William and I climbed aboard his rickety cart, he built it himself, a single lantern bobbed in the morning light. We said almost nothing at first, just watched the gentle prairie breezes part fields of tall grass. "Better get used to Molly," William said with a grin, pointing to a patient-eyed cow watching from the cart. "She doesn't like sugar cubes." I nodded at Molly and replied, "I'll do better with you, I promise." We traced his horse's muddy hoofprints to the Anderson homestead, a snug cabin on the western ridge. William carried our luggage inside the one-room house. I plopped down and immediately felt the dusty floor settle under me. Inside smelled like sweet brown bread and earth. There was no parlour, no fancy chandelier, just a stove, a table and 2 chairs. After a few amused looks at my city dress, William and I had a quick ceremony by the cabin steps with the minister from next door. It was no grand wedding by any account. He grinned and said, "I ain't good at poetry, but Harriet, today I pronounce us husband and wife." I laughed and quoted the line Mamma used from a hymn, "A home built on laughter and kindness." We toasted with cider in tin cups.
Saturday, August 17th, 1872, the Anderson homestead, Kansas. The morning sun didn't wake me as loudly as the barnyard's alarm clock. Chickens, a goat, and the cows filled the air with demands. William led me outside and handed me a milking pail. "First chore of the day," he said cheerfully. My fingers froze around the pail. "Isn't that Farmer McGuffin's wife's job?" I protested. He laughed, the sound echoing from the barnyard. "Not here it isn't. We're partners, Harriet. This farm isn't going to milk itself." The first few days passed in a sleepy blur. I learned to haul water from the creek. Turns out horses drink slower than teenagers on their first day of school, and to feed the chickens. surprisingly as demanding as certain nieces I once had. I'm proud to say I even managed to bake bread without burning the house down. 2 minor kitchen fires later, I called that progress. William helped where he could, though his ego got in the way whenever I hinted his coffee was weak. Finally, by day 7, I made something edible. He said it was fine, but after I fixed him some extra dusty biscuit, I suspect he really liked the fresh salt pork. In these simple rhythms, something comforting grew between us. When I broke a strap on my boot trying to jump a fence, William pulled out his toolbox and stitched it up himself. He teased me about my clumsy footwork, and I noted he still turned 10 shades of red if I called him handsome. Some evenings we sat on the porch sipping herb tea. Without prompting, he always poured my cup first. I mentally marked it as one more good deed. Mother never had that luxury with Papa gone. Sunday, August 25th, 1872, the Anderson homestead. That evening, Margaret Granger, our talkative Norwegian neighbour, came by with pies from her wood stove. She pulled out a wrinkled sheet of paper and slid it across the table. It was a draft of the local marriage pact, a common ritual here. According to this self-made code, William promised never to strike his bride, and I promised never to nag too much. Truly a good bargain, I told Margaret, placing a finger to my lips with a grin. We both laughed. Just after dusk, as we lay in the new feather mattress he'd made in the loft, William said softly, "I think we'll manage pretty well." I grinned back, replying, "If by manage you mean have enough beans for dinner and goat hair in our bed, then yes." He chuckled so loudly it almost spooked the barn dog. In that quiet dark, I realized I didn't even mind being called Mrs. Anderson yet. December 12th, 1872, the Anderson homestead, Kansas. 4 months have turned the prairie into a giant snow globe. Every morning our cabin shrinks with the cold. Last night, William and I melted snow in a pan to brew coffee, and I trimmed the lantern wick by lamplight. The cold is so sharp it hides behind me like a silent fox, biting at my shoulders. I've taken to wearing 2 pairs of wool socks and stuffing straw in my boots. I swear I've never been so grateful for an old quilt. Inside the barn, Molly the cow stands on pillows. Don't tell her I said that. I tried giving her peppermint candies once. Foolish me. The next morning she chewed through the fence to get more, squealing like a plough-horsed pig. "Molly's lost her marbles." William chuckled when he saw the mess. "If a cow can't enjoy a mint, who can?" At breakfast, he confessed he missed campfire cooking. He said a warm porridge felt like luxury now. I teased him that one day I'd make him pizza on this wood stove if we survived the winter. On Wednesday, Margaret and her husband popped by to check on us. We ended up playing poker by lantern light, her laughter mixing with the crackle of the pine logs. Margaret told stories of our holidays back in Pennsylvania, stringing popcorn and waiting up all night on Christmas Eve. For our little Christmas, William hammered a tin star and nailed it to the porch. I baked a gingerbread. It was the first decent one I'd made all year, which we ate with candied yams. That night, listening to William play an old fiddle, I realized something warm and bright was blossoming in this snowbound cabin. February 1st, 1873, the Anderson homestead, Kansas. The snow drifts up like clean blankets all around us, and sometimes I feel the prairie is tucking us in at night. One funny thing, our medicine cabinet froze solid. Yesterday I flung open the door to see icicles hanging where my cough syrup should be. I couldn't help but laugh. William looked at me and said, "Well, at least our whiskey's aged nicely on ice." So yes, winter sucks. The roof leaked over our bed the other night, and we hunted icicles like treasure to fill our water bucket. Last week I even drank a 4-foot icicle I found hanging from the eaves. Call me a pioneer or a pirate on watch. Cooking in this cold takes creativity. Just last night I experimented with turnips and parsnips and ended up with a stew so thick it could glue our hats on. William declared it his best meal ever, high praise, given my streak of experimental flops. Despite it all, the days started feeling snug. After dinner, William would wrap me in our only wool blanket, and we'd watch the dog chase fireflies. Yes, even a few brave bugs still buzz in here. He asked one night, "Do you ever wonder what life would have been like if you'd stayed in Pennsylvania?" I slapped the sole of my boot and answered, "If I'd stayed, I'd just be flat cat food by boredom. No, I'm right where I'm meant to be." He squeezed my hand and said, "That's what I'm thinking too. In that moment, even with snow on the outside, I felt as warm as any hearth. October 1st, 1873, the Anderson homestead, Kansas. I have news. I'm going to be a mother. When I stepped off that train last year, I hadn't imagined finding much beyond flat plains. Now I'm daydreaming about rocking a baby. William and I won't just be raising crops anymore. We're about to raise a son. I'm equal parts thrilled and terrified. He just laughed when I worried about the workload. We've started the best kind of project yet, he said. One that'll keep our farm running long after these hands are done. I smiled, because he always makes even the scariest things seem like adventures. March 12th, 1874. The Anderson homestead, Kansas. As promised, we now have a baby boy, an excellent one at that. His name is Henry, after my father back in Pennsylvania, who would have adored him. He weighed nearly 10 pounds when he arrived on a cold March morning, with a full head of dark hair. William held him wrapped in the patchwork quilt I made from old dress scraps, and I swear for a second the whole cabin held its breath. When Henry let out his first cry, William jumped as though poked by a feather, then laughed, and then cried a little himself. I giggled so hard I almost set my bonnet on fire. July 4th, 1876. The Anderson homestead, Kansas. It's Independence Day and we're celebrating with homemade patriotism. William hammered a scrap of tin to a board for our flag, while Henry, aged 2, pretended it was a canoe paddle and shouted, USA! We ate cornbread and gravy, our own take on 4th of July dinner, and toasted with cider. After dinner, William took me in his arms and said with a laugh, "The bravest thing you ever did was marry a stranger." I rolled my eyes, but as I watched him set Henry on his shoulders, I thought, marriage as adventurous as crossing the continent was definitely a bold move. Each passing season made our family stronger, like the corn stalks we planted each spring. Henry learned to gather eggs, holding the basket so full it tipped over and sent hens scattering. When I played fiddle tunes, he danced and clapped, and neighbours would join with a blanket or extra stew if we walked to a 4th of July picnic. Every day brought new lessons: how to plant potatoes, how to patch a shirt, and how to plant a kiss on your child's head. I realised that our little farm, filled with chores and kids and laughter, was the dream I'd never known I had. February 10th, 1878. The Anderson homestead, Kansas. 5.5 years have passed since that leap of faith I took on a hunch and a skillet, and I've never been happier. Last night at the barn dance, William spun me around the floor and said, "I don't need a letter to remember how to treat you. I already do." I laughed and pressed my forehead to his shoulder, grateful for every page of our story. Our journal is nearly full, but I know that some of the best chapters are still being written by the sunrise each morning. Claire blinked as the sunlight faded on the border of the journal's final entry. She closed the little book gently, as if not to startle the past it held. "Well, Aunt Harriet," she whispered, "you certainly earned yourself a place in our family stories." The heirloom journal, scrawled with old ink and full of laughter and heart, felt almost like a living thing in her hands. She replaced it in the attic trunk and sat back, letting it all sink in. In the quiet attic, the echoes of Aunt Harriet's laughter and William's chuckle seemed to mingle with the ticking of the old clock downstairs. Claire thought of her own life, the comforts of hot coffee and family dinners, and realized how wild and bold her ancestor had been. Reading about Aunt Harriet's crossing of half the continent to marry a stranger almost felt like a dream. Downstairs, her husband Daniel called up, "Dinner's ready?" Claire smiled, closing the attic door gently behind her. As she walked to the kitchen, she passed a shelf with books filled with old family photos. There, right in the center, was Aunt Harriet in her calico dress surrounded by children and grandchildren. The names beneath the portraits showed a little map in itself, Pennsylvania to Kansas and beyond, stitched together like a grand old quilt. That evening at dinner, Claire retold Aunt Harriet's story, complete with flourishes. The kids giggled at the part about how Aunt Harriet might have had more cooking mishaps than a 3-ring circus, especially the day she nearly lost her hair-rolling dough. Daniel rolled his eyes affectionately as Claire quipped about Susan's storage the giant pie that survived the stagecoach ride. Claire realized then that the 19th century adventures from these pages sounded as vivid and amusing as any modern comic novel. Later, with the kids asleep, Claire stepped out onto the porch and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, her Aunt Harriet likely looked at the same sky after a hard day of chores. Modern life had no horses or covered wagons, but Claire felt that the same spirit was alive in her chest, adventurous, hopeful, stubbornly optimistic. She raised a glass of lemonade, a 21st century stand-in for whiskey, and whispered to Aunt Harriet, "May our lives be just as adventurous, if not more so." In that moment, Claire understood something new. Mail-order brides weren't just a dusty piece of history. They were proof of how far someone might go for a new life and for love. Her own world felt a little bigger, stitched with the funny and fearless legacy of a great aunt she was only just getting to know. She turned in for the night feeling like history wasn't so distant after all. With Aunt Harriet's journal tucked safely away, Claire drifted off to sleep contentedly, in that quiet, endearing way of someone who's just finished the best part of a really great book.